State and local governments manage many services involving payment transactions, but managing and integrating resident or constituent profiles to streamline account management and improve the user experience for the public remains a challenge at many state and local government agencies. I'm Wyatt Cash with Scoop News Group, and here to talk about some approaches to tackling those challenges and how the city of Boston is realizing the benefits of streamlining and integrating its payment and account management system is Santiago Garces, Chief Information Officer for the city of Boston, and also Tom Nieto, President of PayIt. Santi and Tom, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
So, Santi, I'd like to start with you. From your perspective, what are the biggest challenges that your organization faces and others like it in managing transaction-based services across the city of Boston and the agencies you support? And where do you see the most friction for residents in their interactions with government services related to payments or account management?
Yeah, so I would say that generally we have a problem that spans two dimensions. The first one is we have this very broad set of services that span across the city. So all the way from you wanting to buy a hot dog from a food truck that is managed by some kids at a vocational school to paying your taxes, all of these different transactions in all sorts of different contexts occur within the span of the city. And we're trying to think about financial controls, ease of transaction, compliance, all sorts of things, right? The other issue that we have is people want to do business with us in different modes. They want to be able to pay by phone, they want to pay online, they want to pay in person, they want to pay with a credit card, they want to pay with cash. So I think that it is the combination of like this multimodality and this breadth of things that we do. And I think that the just to color this is generally we are organized in silos, right? Like the way that we are organizing government is not based on the experience that people have. Like when you're trying to do a permit, you're trying to get a new kitchen, you might need to get a permit to get the construction truck to take out the debris. You might need to do all of these different things. And the reality is that kind of that parceling out of the experience means that you're having to do all of these transactions in different contexts. So it's like the fact that it's so broad, the fact that there's all these like multimodality depth, but it's also not been designed to create like a unified and pleasant experience means that we have we tend to have gaps and creating a good experience across all these pieces is challenging.
Yeah, and then perhaps could you kind of provide a scenario where the lack of integration leads to frustration or friction or inefficiency, both internally and with your constituents?
Well, again, I would say twofold. One, internally, with our first set of customers, which are the departments and agencies, as they start enabling, like we're in a very innovative government. The mayor is trying to, Mayor Michelle Wu is always thinking about new ways of delivering services. But as a case in point, we're trying to help the vocational school be able to enable programming in this food truck where they have kids that are learning how to, in the culinary arts, and they want to be able to sell hot dogs and other kinds of food, enabling that in a way that complies with this broader set of technologies, our revenue reconciliation, that does all of these things that we're supposed to do is challenging. So kind of like the ability for us to be agile and responsive to like really different set of scenarios, all the way from hot dogs for people paying thousands of dollars of their tax bills that's really challenging.
Yeah. So, Tom, I'd like to bring you in here. Can you talk a little about the technologies that are available today that can effectively address some of these challenges? And specifically, how can these technologies help create a more of a single, unified resident profile while also ensuring data security and privacy?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate Santiago's point of view because I think that multimodality approach has complicated over the years, and it's probably the complexity curve keeps increasing. And so I think the big change on the technology side is historically, as he articulated, a lot of technology was organized based off those silos, right? And I think what we're seeing now is a real change where you can bring more of a consumer-based approach where you can see a more horizontal layer. So if I'm a constituent of a jurisdiction and I show up, how I interact with that jurisdiction ideally should look and feel the same no matter which, department or where I'm at within a jurisdiction. And so historically that had felt very different. If you showed up to pay your property tax, that felt extremely different than how I showed up if I had to pay a parking ticket. And I think what we're starting to see is that constituents really want to be able to get in, get their work done, make sure that they can be successful, and then get out as fast as possible. And 80% plus of people who show up on a government website end up with a transaction. And so I think for us, a lot of our approach is how do we make it as simple as intuitive as possible, but also feels more consistent across those different silos, so that even if there are silos on the back end, how a constituent experiences that is different than that. And then I think on the agency side, which is just as important, is helping to pull that together. So instead of saying, oh, I got to go look for a data point over here in one system, I got to look for a data point over here in another system, how do you pull those data sets together, both from a doing their work on a day-to-day basis, but also from a security perspective? Because I think that was the other thing is historically, because there have been so many data silos, the security footprint or vectors for attack were there's a multitude of them, and the more that you can combine those and keep those in a very secure location, you can actually reduce your security or increase your security posture and decrease your security surface attack vectors, which, I think in this day and age, we hear from our clients all the time that both the quantity and quality of the attacks have been increasing. And so I think it's a constant topic that we always explore, which is how do we make sure that together we're reducing that as far as possible? Because I guess for me, every CIO I talk to, it's top of mind for them, and I'm guessing for Santiago the same. Of that's the worst case scenario, so it's the first thing that people want to address is make sure that they feel secure before they address anything else.
Yes. And that certainly contributes to kind of the economies to kind of put back into making the front end more standard, as Santi was talking about. Well, Santi, back to you. Help us get a better sense of kind of the improvements that you're seeing currently from some of your work or that you expect to see in terms of resident satisfaction or government efficiency. Once you've kind of put together an integrated transaction management system. And also, I'm curious, what metrics are you using to track that improvement?
The first piece at a macro level, we're currently tracking general satisfaction with different kinds of services that the city offers. And again, for us, like we know that when people have less friction in interacting with us, that those numbers were likely to go to improve. We're also starting to track those interactions at the transaction level. So again, if you think about people might be getting a permit or they're paying for a death certificate. People are interacting with us not always in context where dealing with us is the top thing that brings them joy in their lives. So I think that we're starting to understand in the context of the journey map, where are people getting stuck and where are people kind of feeling defeated and abandoning applications and things like that. So I think overall for us, when we think about identity, payment, and then a couple of these components of what we would refer to as digital public infrastructure, our sense is that if we're able to do things that are consistent across the board, we should see kind of a improvement in satisfaction, decrease in cost, decrease in abandoned transactions, increasing collections. A lot of times people want to pay their bill. They don't want to do this stuff, but they just have allocated 5 minutes of their life to be able to do that. So they have other stuff to do. So to the extent that the systems are reliable, that they're working, we see some of this. And again, partially in our journey, as we start thinking about what the future of some of these components, as we start thinking about these platform plays, we think, how is it that those things work, especially when we start seeing economies of scale where you are able to do more things in the same transaction or have better flow across different transactions across that entire experience.
And Tom, can you elaborate a little on what other advantages that state and local governments and their leaders are likely to realize by adopting sort of these modern unified approaches to resident data and transaction management? And maybe fill us in just a little bit more on, so what does PayIt do to ease that journey?
Yeah, I think a lot of it starts with the ground level of a user-centric design. And so, I think from a first principles perspective, we were really founded and continue to operate off of how do we, and I think Santi just articulated it really well, of how do you make it as frictionless as possible for the constituent to do business with you? And I think historically, because systems were set up based off those silos. They were set up based off of, I'll call it historical workflows from a jurisdiction versus how does a constituent experience it? How do I, if I've never done a transaction before with a city or a state, how do I show up and do that really easy? How is it very intuitive? And I think a lot of what we try to approach, I think what modern systems do is say, how does that get experienced so you can make that transaction as seamless and frictionless as possible, which I think, to the KPI point, a lot of where we try to measure our success with our clients is what's the adoption level look like? I think our research shows generally around 50% of people will adopt a digital experience on the government side. And generally, if you think of something like online banking, it's 85, 90%. And so how do we drive more towards that type of consumer level adoption? Because I think ultimately that's a really strong success criteria. If people are coming in and using it and ideally using it over and over again, that means that they're finding value in it. I think that's a lot of where we try to work with our clients to say, okay, and he was talking about this, where's the drop off rate? Where are they finding issues? And so we work with our clients to understand where are they finding issues and how do we streamline that so that someone can actually come in and do their transaction in that 5 minutes they have allotted versus they give up on it and then they have to take 2 hours out of their day to go down to an office and have a conversation where we find a lot of times people show up in person because they couldn't create a digital transaction. And so we view that as something we try to avoid from a success criteria. And if they want to, that's fine. But I would say 95% of the people that we've surveyed have said, if possible, we would like to complete a transaction online versus ever having to show up in an office. And I think we're seeing that number actually increase, and it's becoming really the exception versus the rule.
Yes, I think most people would agree that's the way we'd prefer to do it if we could, right? So, well, Santi, talk to me a little more about what lessons that you've learned or recommendations you might offer on implementing a modernized integrated payment and account management systems. I mean, I think most of our audience all appreciates the silos they're dealing with. They don't have the budgets they all wish they had, and yet they know they need to move in this direction. So how can state and local governments, overcome some of those barriers, and what recommendations would you make?
Yeah, no, again, I think that the first piece is just acknowledging we're all in a journey, and the world changes, the technologies change, the expectations of people change. So I think that just a little bit of the humility of operating in government, but everything that we do in government, every service, every street that gets built, every dispatch of a police officer or a paramedic starts with getting money from someone to pay for that. So this stuff is important. So I think the first lesson is building for experience again. And it's something that is not always intuitive in government because, again, we have a monopoly over the things that we do. We don't always think that we're competing against someone else to build a good experience, but being focused on building the resources and the practice to start thinking about, like, what are people trying to do when they interact with us? Because if we build experiences that are better designed, that have intention in like when and how we explain to people what are they're supposed to be doing, they'll be less frustrated. Our employees will be less frustrated, and we get to a happier outcome sooner. And if you care about equity, likewise, you start thinking about the ability of making sure that people did the right thing. So you're not like putting penalties and doing other things that can be actually quite disruptive to people. The second piece that I would say is having clarity in the end goal. So these things are iterative again, like thinking about, for us, the city, we have a budget of over $4.6 billion, which at some point need to be collected through, again, taxes, fees, fines, all sorts of different things. So it's going in and saying, even if we don't have a fully standardized, if we don't have a perfect setup right now, knowing generally where we're trying to go, like, are we trying to be able to have more leverage in how we deal with transaction costs because we're able to pool different things? Are we going for an enterprise play? Are we going for a platform play? Like all of those things, even though you can't do it instantly, if you don't have the vision of where you want to go, it's going to be hard to, as you start executing different projects, making sure that you're consistently getting closer to a place. And again, if you do it well, there are ways in which you reduce the cost of operation, you increase the speed at which you're able to deploy the next experience or to retrofit the next experience. And to that effect, the last one, again, classic agile, just embrace the fact that you are where you are, try to make the next thing better. It's okay, it feels a little bit messy. It's normal to have setbacks. A number of things need to be in place for these things to work perfectly. Like you have to have the right talent and the right people. You have to have the right funding. You have to get the right stakeholder buy-in because we're trying to coordinate things across the board. You have to have the right architecture. It's fine if it's not all in place at the same time. If we are building one piece at a time and we're making it better, we can build the trust and we can build the muscle that helps us get closer to that end goal.
Well, I'd certainly add there's a great business case for focusing on payment transactions and modernizing that and making sure the experience works well, because it really supports, the sort of financial foundations of an agency. So it certainly makes a lot of sense. Last question for both of you. Looking ahead, maybe 2 or 3 years, what does the future of public transactions look like? And how can states and local agencies, continue to innovate to improve the citizen experience and optimize government operations? Santi, maybe I'll ask you to take that one, and Tom, you can wrap up.
Yeah, I think, again, we're in a very interesting point in time where I think, there's a clear sense that government needs to earn the trust of the people that it serves. And I think that comes the way of having clear and helpful interaction. So obviously, again, like that payment is the last moment where we're making their money, our money, so that we could go and do something good with it. I think that having a good experience there and that paying government your taxes, whatever fee, whatever that you're trying to do is an act of trust. So I think that there's that's a little bit more at the philosophical level. But again, I think that having things that feel frictionless, having things that feel like that are helpful, meeting people where they are is, I think, important. And again, I think that the way that there's some level of uncertainty. That's what's fun being in these jobs. We don't know what technologies are going to be pervasive in 5 years that are not now. Maybe they'll be making payments in the metaverse or something. I don't know. But whatever it is, that we are ready to meet the need. But again, always delivering an experience that is efficient, that is effective, that meets people where they are, and that makes them feel like they got treated properly.
Mm-hmm. And Tom?
Yeah, no, I would echo everything Santi just said. I think, what we're seeing is a heavy push, and I'll just use the buzzword of AI right now. I think we're seeing people think about, most of our clients, I think, struggle from a capacity internally on the staffing side, whether that be either from a number of staff or actually filling roles. And so I think what we see a lot of people really think about is like, where are the places where we're spending a lot of time that's not adding value? And I think as Santi was articulating really well, of you know, most of our clients want their staff focused on generating better outcomes for their constituents versus just doing the back office type work or things that just take a long time because they're manual processes. And so I think what we've been working with those who are, I would say, further out on the spectrum, thinking about how do they automate as much as possible where it's not adding a lot of value day to day to a constituent in their experience. And so then they can use their very valuable staff time to think about things like equity, to think about things like experience, to make sure that they're out there in front of them and talking to them about how this is actually helping to generate differentiated outcomes for them in their communities. And I think that's it's a big word and there's a lot in there, but I think, a lot of that starts with how do you think about data and data security, and making sure that you have the right access to the right data points so then you can actually know your I'll call it customer in this case, or your constituent, right? Of if someone shows up and they have to fill out 3 pages of forms that they filled out last week, they're not going to feel like you're thinking about them and owning that experience with them. But if they show up and they say, "Hey, Tom, I see you logged in. I see you were here last week and you filled out this form. The next step in this process, you got approval here. The next step of your process is this, and we've already pre-populated it. Like, does this all look right to you? Yes." Like, that's a very different experience versus I got to hand fill out a PDF and fax it into you, which is the experience that was happening, not even that long ago. So I think continuing to move forward the experience both on the constituent side as well as the staff side is really important so that the time can be spent on the places where you really add value versus where you spend a lot of time on the more manual processes.
Absolutely. Well, Santi, Garces, and Tom Nieto, thank you so much for joining us here and sharing your respective insights on the evolution of payment and transactions for state and local government and some of the ways to improve that experience for the constituents. So thank you both for joining us.